The housing market in Tier 1 nations is fundamentally broken, but not in the way most people think. It is not just a crisis of high interest rates or a shortage of building materials. It is a crisis of structural misalignment. Today, we have an entire generation of older adults who are asset-rich but cash-poor, living alone in massive suburban homes they can no longer physically or financially maintain. Simultaneously, we have a generation of young professionals who are hyperproductive but completely locked out of property ownership, watching their wealth erode to rent inflation. Traditional finance offers no solution to this. The banks suggest predatory reverse mortgages for the elderly or 30-year debt traps for the young. But a quiet alternative is emerging at the intersection of microfinance and contract law. It is called a microequity agreement. This is the exact step-by-step breakdown of how a 27-year-old software analyst named Marcus and a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher named Evelyn bypassed the banking system entirely to merge their financial interests, secure their futures, and build an intergenerational equity pool. To understand how they did this, we first have to look at the baseline math of their respective crises. Evelyn owned a 4-bedroom home in a major metropolitan suburb. The property was fully paid off, valued at roughly $800,000. On paper, Evelyn was wealthy. In reality, her fixed pension left her struggling to keep up with skyrocketing property taxes, utility bills, and basic maintenance costs. The house was deteriorating, and her isolation was compounding. Meanwhile, Marcus was paying $2,400 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment less than 20 minutes away. Over 5 years, Marcus had thrown over $140,000 into dead rent, capital that was completely gone, yielding zero equity. He had saved a $50,000 nest egg, but in a market where standard down payments require 6 figures, he was permanently stuck on the sidelines. The breakthrough occurred when they realized their needs were perfectly complementary. Evelyn needed liquid capital and assistance maintaining her property. Marcus needed a place to live where his monthly outflow actually built long-term wealth. The execution of their arrangement did not rely on handshake agreements or vague promises. It required a rigorous, 4-step financial framework designed to protect both parties while generating a predictable return on investment. Step 1 was the valuation and modernization capital injection. Before any legal equity could be shifted, the property required a baseline assessment. Evelyn and Marcus hired an independent appraiser who valued the home at exactly $800,000. However, the property was not configured for co-living. To ensure privacy and autonomy, the home needed an independent living suite, a conversion of the ground floor garage and den into a self-contained apartment with its own entrance, kitchenette, and bathroom. This is where the microfinance mechanism first kicked in. Marcus deployed his $50,000 savings not as a down payment to a bank, but as a direct capital injection into Evelyn's property to fund the renovation. Under standard real estate logic, putting money into a home you do not own is financial suicide. But under their microequity agreement, that $50,000 was legally formalized as an immediate 6.25% equity stake in the property. The math is straightforward. 50,000 divided by 800,000 equals 0.0625. Marcus was no longer a tenant. He was a fractional shareholder in the physical asset. Step 2 involved the structuring of the monthly microequity acquisition. Once the renovation was complete and Marcus moved into the ground floor suite, they needed a system to govern the monthly financial transactions. In a standard rental arrangement, Marcus would pay Evelyn rent, which would be treated as taxable income for Evelyn and a total loss for Marcus. Instead, they established a dual payment structure. They calculated the fair market rent for the suite at $1,500 a month. This payment was split into 2 distinct financial categories. The first category was an expense allocation of $500 per month, paid by Marcus to Evelyn to cover his exact share of property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, and general maintenance. This kept Evelyn's ongoing carrying costs completely covered without eroding her liquidity. The remaining $1,000 was designated as a monthly equity buy-in. Every month, Marcus transferred $1,000 directly into a dedicated escrow account. In exchange for this capital, Evelyn transferred a microscopic fraction of her remaining home equity to Marcus each month. Based on the initial $800,000 valuation, A $1,000 monthly payment equals exactly 0.125% of the home's total value. Over the course of a single year, Marcus would acquire an additional 1.5% equity stake in the home, while Evelyn received $12,000 in completely liquid, tax-efficient cash flow to supplement her pension. Step 3 was the legal framework that protected this unconventional partnership. Bypassing a bank does not mean bypassing contract law. Marcus and Evelyn worked with an asset protection attorney to draft a customized tenants-in-common agreement, coupled with a robust buy-sell provision. This legal instrument addressed the critical risks that cause traditional investors to avoid partnerships. First, it established a clear protocol for property appreciation. The agreement dictated that any future appreciation of the property would be shared proportionally based on their equity percentages at the time of an eventual sale. If the home value grew to $1 million over 7 years, Marcus's initial and accumulated equity would apply to that higher valuation, compounding his returns. Second, the contract established strict exit clauses. What happens if Marcus gets a job offer in another state? What happens if Evelyn requires advanced medical care and needs to transition to an assisted living facility? To solve this, the agreement gave Marcus the right of first refusal to purchase Evelyn's remaining equity if she chose to sell, utilizing his accumulated equity as his down payment for a traditional mortgage at that future date. Conversely, if Marcus needed to exit, the agreement allowed Evelyn to buy back his fractional shares over time, or permitted Marcus to sell his fractional stake to an approved incoming young professional under the exact same contract terms. Step 4 addressed the human element through an operational framework. Intergenerational co-living only succeeds if the social boundaries are as clearly defined as the financial ones. Their agreement included a legally binding code of conduct covering noise levels, shared spaces, guest policies, and property upkeep. Marcus agreed to take over physical property management duties, such as landscaping, waste management, and minor repairs, which were quantified and credited against his monthly expense allocation, saving Evelyn an additional thousands of dollars annually in hired labor. Let us look at the financial reality of this agreement after exactly 5 years of operation. Under the old paradigm, Marcus would have spent $90,000 in rent over those 5 years, retaining zero assets. Instead, through his initial $50,000 renovation injection and his $1,000 monthly buy-ins, Marcus now owns a 13.75% physical stake in the property. If the home simply maintains its baseline valuation of $800,000, Marcus's net worth has grown to exactly $110,000 in pure real estate equity. If the property appreciates at a standard 3% annually, his actual wealth is significantly higher. For Evelyn, the transformation is equally profound. Instead of being trapped in a deteriorating asset with dwindling cash reserves, she has received $60,000 in direct liquid capital from the monthly buy-ins, alongside an additional $30,000 that completely eliminated her utility and property tax burdens. Her home is modernized, its value is preserved, her isolation is eliminated, and she retains over 86% ownership of her primary asset.